The book of Proverbs, verse 14. Counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have insight. I have power. Hi, everybody. This is a Christian ministry community channel about entertainment called Christian. What's it called? Christian RPG Gamers. Okay, so I'm trying this out with the headphones on. I don't know how this is going to sound or look. There's also a little bit of a storm outside. It's raining. There might be some lightning. I mean, I'm probably not in danger, right? But you might hear some thunder outside or something. Like the weather is the hand of God, right? Okay, so I want to make this video. I want to talk about the Elder Scrolls Online. And as I usually do in just about every video, right? I'll put some kind of a Christian perspective in it. But we'll see what happens, right? Okay, so I wrote a little bit some notes down here. I also might watch a video too. Okay, so one of my Christian perspectives, and obviously there's like 15 things I could talk about, but one I wrote down, I wrote this notes like almost half of these notes a week ago. There was some of them done today. I put finding meaning out of quantity plus grind. So obviously the Elder Scrolls Online is an MMO game, and it is a huge grindy game. Okay, so some notes I wrote down. It's a high fantasy, an RPG, it's online, there's dungeons, there's a grind, it's big, and it's complex. And it's also a very big game. Tons of side quests that are kind of more one-shot. There's a story, like a story zone. Like there's a quest per every single story zone on the map. And they've been filling them in over the years too. It's honestly pretty full at this point. But they still have more space to put more stuff. There's a boatload of dailies. I put 2 big pluses. Lots of social interaction. So it's an MMO game. You can interact with other people. There's lots of collecting and building gear for different loadouts for different builds. There are a handful of things I really like about this game. So there's 2 aspects to the game I'll talk about a little bit. I'll probably watch a video here too. One aspect to the video game is there's known as champion points 160, or known as like CP 160. So before you get to level champion point 160, the game is you just kind of play the game and do whatever. And once you get to 160 CP, then you get the maximum tier level equipment. So you can start kind of building your own build. And by then you have to go through level 1 all the way to level 50. And you just kind of like it's like a tick up until you get to 160 after 50. So by then you have the capacity to at least have one basic build. You'll probably have like 45. You probably have at least enough. Probably if you're doing some extra stuff, they give you some sky shards. They give you dungeons, can give you skill points. You probably, to be honest, have. If you're playing it casually in a normal pace and you're doing some of the extra stuff, you probably have like 75 skill points. You should have more than enough to get at least one Pacific combat build. As long as you're using at least using at least one of every single major skill. Again, I don't always agree with magic or whatever, but you'll probably have pretty high ranked in a lot of the extra abilities. And if you're using say using like two-handed sword, right? Or sword and shield because you want to be a tank, or some of the extra stuff, and most of them, your abilities will be maxed out eventually. But by the time you reach, level 50 or CP 160, it's not overly difficult, but it does take some time. And again, there's lots of grinding. It's kind of like a forever game. It's an MMO. It's just tons and tons of stuff to do. So again, once you get to 160, then all your gear caps out. So every time you go to a dungeon, you're always going to get level 160 equipment. So you start trying to build different sets. Obviously you don't want to be like a hoarder. You only have so much space too. you can only use one set throughout the game at one time, but you can switch your loadouts. And there's medium, there's light, and there's heavy. Light's more for magic users. Personally, I just don't really support magic, but it is what it is. It's a fantasy game. I mean, I'm a Christian, right? I don't really support magic, but there is the medium and there is the heavy, and there's like a whole bunch of different stuff you can use. So you can get a handful of different builds. Again, it's kind of like it's a fun grind, right? Okay. So I kind of gone over some of the basics here. Let's find a little video on YouTube to watch. I think I've watched some videos from the guy called Asmongold. He's done a couple of videos from this guy called Force Gaming. So I don't know what this video is going to say in it. It's probably not super heavy language or anything, but I might watch at least some of this video here. I might watch a different video too, depending on how bored I am or how much I like it, or maybe I'll really like it, right? Oh, here. I'll give him a like. Here, I'll show you all the way you're supposed to do it, right? Good. Oops. Yeah, I should probably lead by example rather than just words. Here, I'll give him a sub. I don't know if I'm going to keep subscribing. I do like the guy. He's a pleasant personality. Okay. Obviously, fair use is a thing. If you like this person's channel, give him a sub, give him a like, say a comment. I don't know. Try not to be a dick, or just try to be a nice guy, or do whatever you want at the end of the day, right? But if you're a Christian, glorify God. All right, so I'll listen to this person's thoughts. I'll probably give some of my own thoughts. I'll try to put some kind of a Christian's perspective on this. Let's see what this person has to say.
I honestly can't believe it, but it's been 10 years now since The Elder Scrolls Online first released. I still vividly remember playing the game during beta testing back in early 2014, going through those starting zones as a stealthy bow and dagger wielding Khajiit, trying my hand at soloing world bosses, which were actually somewhat challenging at the time, and hiding in the shadows near cave entrances in Cyrodiil, waiting for unsuspecting players as I attempted to burst them down while they were still loading into the game. The good old days. But yeah, man, it's been 10 years since ESO launched, and in that time, the game has remained a staple of mine. It is one of the MMOs that I enjoy revisiting each and every year. I like coming back, loading up an old character, or even starting a new one, and checking out all of the latest content. I like that I can enjoy much of it solo, leveling up and going through the new zones, and then grouping up if I'm in the mood for farming dungeons or doing PvP. I also like that I never feel too far behind when jumping back in, as the game's got a relatively horizontal power progression. Every time I come back, I can pick up where I left off and not feel terribly far behind.
Okay, let me just say that. So that's both a pro and a negative. It's we call it a pro and a con, right? Positive and a negative. The game is very balanced in its own right, but to be honest, sometimes that can feel stale and boring at the same time. It's like it's very vanilla, but it doesn't always feel like it's as satisfying sometimes either, because you can beat the game and play the whole game and beat it. It's kind of like almost like on easy, right? Now, this game can be ball-breaking hard, right? But most of the vast majority of ESO, to be honest, is super easy. So, but the hard parts of this game are extraordinarily hard. So it's kind of a balance, right? Like, you can come back after playing this game years later, but if you're playing PvP, you're doing these, I think they're called a trial. I know there's like the individual trials, and there's like the big trials or whatever. Like, you have like the 12-man groups or whatever, the 16-man groups. Those can be really, really hard. I've done a couple times. I've gone in with like a guild. Those are extremely difficult. But it's also really fun at the same time. And there's like the individual stuff. Again, the game can be easy, but the game can be really hard at the same time. And the progression, again, the game. I do respect the game for being pretty balanced. They make it so that most people can play most of the content fairly simply, but It also, if the game is so easy to the point where it's just kind of slap your enemies to death, and you just put a minimum amount of effort in, again, it's not that fun. You want a game to be hard. You want a game to be hard enough that there's a challenge, but not so backbreakingly difficult that it's not. Again, you want it to be fun, but you also want it to be somewhat challenging. You got to give your the player something to aspire to want to become, or to have to oppose to get through, right? Like, again, like even Christian or biblically, right? You go through trials and tests. I guess, ironically, the game calls them trials, right? But you want to defeat your big bad boss, so then you want to feel a lot of pride in yourself or value, but you don't want it to be so hard that it's excruciating. But if again, you want to have some challenge, but you want it to be reasonable that you can defeat the enemy. Or if you come up with a smart strategy, you should be able to beat the enemy. But you don't want to make it you don't want to make it so hard that people rage quit. But again, if you make it too easy, then people are going to get really bored and they're not going to feel satisfied with anything they're doing. So you got to try to have a level of balance, right? I feel like ESO. How long is this so far? ESO is a pretty balanced game. As like a vanilla, it's pretty balanced. It has really, really hard content that is extremely difficult, and a good portion of this game you cannot beat by yourself. You have to have other players. But I do respect the fact that, for the most part, most of the main story quests, like most of the quest line content, is beatable solo, or if you can play solo, plus you bring in a companion with you. You have some decent equipment. You're well prepared, and you have a solid build, and you're well prepared. You should be able to beat the vast majority of all main story content, and all the most of the story content is balanced and fair. World bosses, dungeons, and trials, and some of the bigger bad stuff, you honestly cannot beat the game solo. You have to bring you probably need a 4-man team to beat most of the content. There's multiplayer content that's explicitly made to beat with 4 people. You need the tank, you need the DPS, and you need usually 2 DPSs, a tank, and a healer. And if you're going to join the group, you find doing world boss farming and stuff like that. It's not even a bad idea to bring 6 or 7 people, and it'll make it a lot faster and smoother. Again, most of the game is designed for either solo content or 4-man content. Then the game's pretty fair, right? Okay, let's just listen to what this guy has to say.
General structure of each year's updates tend to be very similar. It also offers a new part of Tamriel to explore, new dungeons and boss mechanics to learn, and typically there are 1 or 2 new game systems to try out as well. For ESO's 10th anniversary, this remains true. The Gold Road chapter launches soon on June 3rd for PC and June 18th for Xbox and PlayStation, and comes with all the expected content along with the new edition and game system of scribing. Bethesda is sponsoring today's video. They asked me to show and share with you some of the new content and features that are coming in Gold Road, and I've been playing through the update over this past week, giving it a look, checking out all of the new content there is to see and do, and we're going to be checking out all of that and talking about it here in this video. But before we dive into that though, I want to take a quick look back just as a reminder to how the game has changed and evolved over the years. So when ESO first released in April 2014, the game included several playable zones for each of the 3 factions. In those zones you would find content like points of interest, these numerous locations scattered around the map that either tied to the main story or side quest, all of them fantasy themed with the Elder Scrolls sort of locations that you might expect. Those were all present here. Then there were the delves, these explorable mini dungeons with some narrative element and typically a boss at the end, as well as public dungeons significantly larger and more complex than the delves with bigger groups of enemies. Delves might have 2 to 3 enemies in a grouping, whereas the public dungeons could have 5 to 7 with some elites thrown in. in, and there would typically be like 3 to 5 bosses in each of the public dungeons as well. They were almost like traditional MMO instance group dungeons, but fully open instead. So you could walk in and you could just see a group of like 10 people running around. Then there were world events in the base version of ESO. These were specifically called dolmens. There would be several dolmens in every zone, and the game would cycle between them which one was active. When a dolmen was active, as soon as a player walked nearby and attacked these NPCs that were doing a ritual, the event would then begin. Chains would slam down from the sky with hordes of Daedra enemies summoning in, and a big boss at the end after you filled these containers with the Daedra souls. There were also straight up world bosses, very challenging open world enemies, either one tough enemy or a group of enemies. These usually required a group to complete, or if you were very well geared or skilled, capable of kiting, you might be able to do the boss mechanics and solo it yourself. And they had the regular straight up dungeons, traditional MMO content. These were 4-man groups going into instance locations to clear packs of elites and fight challenging bosses, all for the sake of loot. And then there was usually a major town or city in every zone with vendors, story NPCs, and crafting stations, and every faction also had its own capital city in one of the zones as well. So at release, every zone contained all of that content. The points of interest, delves, public dungeons, world events, world bosses, group dungeons. You would follow the main story quest, moving through each zone in your faction's territory, checking out all of that stuff as you progress the story and leveled up. Then when finishing the story, you'd arrive at its culmination in this place called Cold Harbor. This was sort of like an end game location. It was at the very least the end of your main narrative arc. At that point, the game said, hey, do you want to play as a spy and sneak behind enemy lines going through the other faction zones? To which the answer was, duh, more content. So this would move you into the post-leveling system of the veteran ranks, and you would go through the experience of clearing the zones for the other factions. In addition to that, there was PvP content, which came in the form of Cyrodiil, one massive open zone where the game's 3 factions would fight for control of territory, capturing towers and points of interest, attempting to push the other 2 factions back. I adored this at release. This was some of my favorite MMO PvP content ever. I just really liked the scale, the number of players, the castle sieges, but then also the small scale stuff, like with me sneaking behind enemy lines, trying to capture points while everyone was distracted elsewhere, or hiding in stealth in bushes, waiting to pick off stragglers as large groups roamed by. It was a heck of a lot of fun. I really, really liked Cyrodiil. And that was more or less ESO at release. Do the main story quests, move through the zones, level up, then start progressing the other zones at endgame, climbing veteran ranks while farming for gear, which would either be weapons and gear sets found in group dungeons, overworld sets, or learning the traits to craft your own gear sets as well. And if you enjoyed it, as I did, there was a lot of fun to be had in Cyrodiil's PvP. Then after that launch version of the game came the updates, with the new content additions each and every year in the form of DLC and chapters. Most of the chapters in particular have always added at least one brand new playable zone to explore with all of the expected content. These areas again would have a new story, and you'd move through the zone going through the points of interest delves, public dungeons, instance group dungeons, doing world events, fighting world bosses. But then also in the chapters as well as the DLC, there's been additional new features and types of content, like different ways to play the game, new systems added to the game that's happened over time. So let's check out that. In 2015, about a year after the game launched, we got the Imperial City. This opened up a brand new PvEVP space, the city districts and the sewers. So you would go here to farm enemies for the special currency in exchange for gear, but also players from other factions were hanging around as well, and it had open PvP. So things got a little crazy, and at times keyboard smashing, because if you died, they could actually steal the currency that you were farming for. How fun this was really depended on what end of the equation you found yourself on. 2015 brought us the Zone of Orsinium, as well as the Maelstrom Arena. This is really cool. It was a single player challenge trial where you would fight through these increasingly difficult waves of enemies and challenging bosses for some really good loot. And I mean really good stuff. Very strong weapons. In particular, these are things that are still viable to this day from content that came out in 2015. In 2016, we got the Thieves Guild, and this wasn't just a thematic NPC faction to speak with, but a new thief-related mechanics were added to the game. Unlocking the Thieves Guild skill line offered new tools for sneaking and thieving. You could pickpocket and steal items that you would sell to guild fences. There was a bounty system where if you broke the law, you would get a bounty, so you'd have to be careful about not attacking NPCs in town or to get caught stealing, or else you would get a bounty. There were also daily heist missions asking you to sneak into warehouses or homes to steal very specific specific items, and all throughout the overworld, thieves' troves were added, and if you found one, you would loot it for valuables.
Okay, let me see here. Okay, so I think the main point that I would get to here is what? There is just, a boatload of stuff to do. And this video could go on for like 3 hours, just talking, like 3 full hours, talking about all the crap you can do in the game. Okay, there's just so much stuff to do in the game, and they add a new DLC every year, or sometimes they add 2 or 3 small DLCs to become part of one major DLC. They add a new mechanic in every time. They just add more and more stuff into the game. There's just like 3,000, probably 3,000+ hours worth of content if you want. Or if you're playing more, it's just you want to beat the main story and do some of the main stuff, you can probably put like 200 hours into the game easily if you just feel like more of a normie, right? And there's just a ton of stuff to do. So I think that's good enough for the video for right now. Sometimes I think watching someone else's video or just some of their video can help get the creative juices flowing a little bit too. Okay. Ooh. Okay. Again, there's stealing, and there's like the murdering guild, and that stuff is evil, right? They have a mages guild, again, like spellcasting, a lot of stuff in fantasy. It's pretty shady. There's a lot of wickedness, a lot of pagan themes. But again, as a Christian, you should be careful of the dark stuff. But again, they also have like the Fighters Guild, and they have they have like the Undaunted Guild. They have a handful of some more neutral, honorable, more righteous guilds you can join to. And again, sometimes stuff is pretty neutral and pretty subjective at the end of the day. Okay, so again, I would say this game is incredible. Now, I know there's Final Fantasy, I think it's called 14 online, and there's also World of Warcraft. I mean, World of Warcraft, to be honest, is kind of an old game. I almost feel like it's a dead game. It came out way before these other games. It's kind of lost its splendor. It's not that great anymore, to be honest. It's still a cool game. I haven't even played the game or seen it in years. Final Fantasy 14 online is also a really cool game. I do like it. A lot of people complain that they feel like, if they say they feel like it's a little bit outdated. I feel like Final Fantasy 14 online, it kind of ended on Endwalker a little bit, but it's also kind of debatable, right? But that game is cool. It's a very PvE, very comfortable sort of game, and I do like that game. But I don't know. I just haven't played it that much. This game, I really like this game though. I think it's one of the best. Honestly, I think it's probably the best MMO game out there, especially if you like single player content. Right? It's like a single player MMO that you can have lots of online capabilities, but also has a lot of single player stuff too. And okay, so this game is incredible. It's huge. There's tons of stuff in it. You can make moral choices. There's just a bajillion hours of just tons of crap to do. Okay. So now if I'm going to put a little bit of a Christian perspective on this. So what I was initially talking about before is the idea of, I'd probably argue the idea of finding meaning and value out of a grind or just tons of quantity stuff to do. Because even the book of Ecclesiastes, it's the idea of meaninglessness, and that pretty much just life is kind of meaningless in a lot of ways. And I think a good Christian message I would put in this is, finding meaning out of quantity and grinding. I think that's probably the best Christian spin or message that I could come up with. Um, so again, like as a Christian, you can choose to glorify God. And yeah, to be honest, like a lot of video games, just watching stories, whatever you're doing in life, just hypothetically think of like 200 years into the future. Like was like 2000, I don't know, like 200 or 2250 or however, a couple hundred years, give or take some extra years. Will any of the things you've done in this life really mean anything? And does it really have a lot of value? I mean, look back at like, several hundred years into the past, like year 1800 or something, right? I mean, how much of the stuff that they did then, does that really matter to anyone right now? Some of the stuff that people did matter, but not really, right? Like obviously some foundations of some stuff still exist. They did a lot of good. They progressed forward, but it also kind of doesn't matter, right? And again, like this is a hard, difficult matter to grasp that I personally struggle myself with, but just grasping, how much does your life matter? How much of the decisions you make every day, do they really matter in any real serious capacity? I think the truth is that they don't. You can choose to believe that your choices matter. I think there is a level of truth to that, right? Is that, in holiness, God in heaven, He exists and He created earth. And He put people on earth to live their lives, and whatever His will is, that's what He does, right? Like human life is just here one day and it's gone tomorrow. It's a harsh reality, but it's the truth. Again, like even playing this game, you can I think I probably put, like, to be honest, and I'm not even like, up there. I probably put like, I don't know, probably put around 800 hours into this game. I played on and off. I beat the game about 2 full times. I'm going on for my 3rd one now, right? Like, again, does it, I feel like, you can choose to have something matter to you as an individual. I also believe in holiness, that God cares about what we do. But the other reality is most other people don't care. Now, if they're like your mother or your father or your best friend or something, or your child, or someone deeply close to you, that person matters to you and you matter to them. But somebody who lives like 250 miles away from you, and even if there's like a time gap jump, they don't know you, and to be honest, they probably don't really care. And that's probably a hard reality to accept. They probably don't care, to be honest. Again, like, the idea of like finding meaning. Again, a lot of life is subjective. If it's subjective, you can just choose to find whatever you want to find from it. Do you want this to matter to you? You can find a way to make it matter. I mean, again, like even my little channel, a little bit ironic, I guess, but like, there's like YouTube, right? You can make a YouTube walkthrough. You could do the main story. You make little videos about it. And then if you're a Christian, you could, in holiness, just pray to God and upload them or glorify God with it. And maybe people will watch them. And maybe they'll enjoy them, or they'll find whatever value they want to find from it. Or they won't. And that can be meaningful in its own right. And you can put a Christian spin on it. That adds additional layer of meaning to it. Again, like, you can enjoy yourself playing a game. It is a lot of fun, and again, I think a lot of life is subjective, and you can just choose to find value if you want to find value in something. You can just decide that within yourself this matters, and then to you and to some other people, therefore it matters, because you choose to have it matter. Therefore it matters. It's probably sounds irrational to someone, but I want something to matter to me, and therefore it matters. But yeah, like, it's a great game, and there's tons of stuff to do in it. So yeah, Okay, so I guess one last part I'll talk about here. Again, this is kind of like a little one-shot video I made. I was playing through the game. I just kind of regrinding and re-leveling up. I was doing it on a fresh, brand new account too, so I don't really have my old champion points. I think I had like 330 on my old account, but I'm using a different account. No, obviously linked to my YouTube on this other account I have. So I think I'm like 170 maybe champion points right now. I might go through. Oh, to be honest, I wouldn't hold my breath on it, but I might make a main story walkthrough of ESO, and I'm not sure what other stuff I want to do for it or not. Again, I do be honest, I enjoy making content for stuff like, playing a walkthrough of a game. But so I might do what I've been doing. It might be a little video you'll see on my channel. I don't know when I'm putting it up. But I think I made it for like the first 10 minutes of Kingdom Come Deliverance. So I might try doing something like that for kind of like my walkthrough for ESO or one of these other games. Again, I don't know when I'm going to get around to it. I also just might scrap the project, but we'll see. But I might go through the main story of ESO, or maybe or I might go through some of the different like zone quests they have. Like they have little main story zone quests. So obviously with my little YouTube channel, right? Yeah, I try not to make myself I try not to make the channel myself, but what I might do is, so again, and I feel like I try to avoid the side stuff. I don't want to go through side quests. Honestly, I really don't even want to go through the DLCs. I don't want to go through a lot of extra stuff, because the reason why I don't want to do this is because I'll never actually finish any of my content, right? Now, I'm not against, that's why I want to focus more on the main story of content I make. But I think for like an MMO style game, I'm open-minded to the idea of potentially doing some of the main zone story quests. Again, it also depends on how interesting they are too, right? Like I wouldn't be against that. Maybe I make the story of them. I might put a little Christian spin on them, or just some neutral commentary or whatever, right? It's good to make content. Also in Holiness, you can glorify God with it at the end of the day. But we'll see what happens, right? I mean, I got a million projects. The odds that I'll ever actually do this game, I was thinking about doing for Final Fantasy 16 or maybe the Pillars of Eternity. I honestly don't know whether I'm going to make content for any of those or not. We'll see what happens. In Holiness, if God is willing, that is, right? Again, I have no idea whether I'm gonna really make content for any of these games, or what I'm gonna do or not gonna do. But we'll see what happens, right? At some point, I'll probably want to make another walkthrough, but who's to say? So yeah, like there's this game, right? So it's called ESO, or it's called The Elder Scrolls Online. And again, there is just a mountain of crap to do in the game, and some of it, I guess, one could argue means something, and some of it is just kind of just fluff. But there's just tons of stuff in it. And I think it's a cool game, and I respect what they made. And this game came out like 10 plus years ago, and it's still going. That's cool, right? Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some stuff you got to be careful about the game. There's lots of sorcery in it. They have necromancy. They have false deities. They have demons. They just have a ton of wicked stuff, and they have stealing, and they have murdering. There's a lot of evil stuff you got to be careful about in it too. But there's also a lot of good stuff you can find if you want to. Even this picture here, right? There's a soul manipulation or whatever spell he's casting. But again, then there's you can use a bow and arrow. You can use a sword. Again, you can use stealth. Again, it's set within the Elder Scrolls. It's set in the Elder Scrolls lore. It's kind of like make your own adventure. It's a little bit like a D&D Make your own adventure, right? Again, you can choose to find value if you want to find value from something, or you can choose not to find value if you don't want value in something. And even the bad crap in the series could have value, hypothetically, depending on the perspective you want to look at it. Even evil content, as a Christian, you could find a way to glorify God with it. Again, you can look at it from the enemy's perspective, and maybe you can even learn from bad people, right? I'm not saying the bad stuff is good. It's obviously bad. Again, you can learn some life lessons or some wisdom, learn what you shouldn't do. You can learn the consequences of actions. I think bad stuff could be good in some sense if you wanted to find value from it. But yeah, let's take a look here about other content creators. So, if I'm going to talk about a content creator, I should at least try to be more, show respect, right? And it's okay to be a little bit critical, but you should try to show respect if possible. Again, I think the guy, the famous man, the famous pastor, his name is called John MacArthur. He says, it's like not living on an island, right? And I also like this guy a lot. Obviously, I'm pretty biased, but his name's called, Pater. I do not know how to pronounce his name, to be honest, but it's called like Paeter. He has a channel. He plays it with Skyrim. I talked to him a little bit in the conversation. He also was live streaming the other day, and I talked to him a little bit there too. Again, he has a guy, I think it's called Elderist. He's like an evil, insane, screwed up in the head wizard that he plays in like darker fantasy content. And again, I guess the basic idea is that as a Christian, you could watch a bad person in a game, right? Like you got this like insane, evil, just kind of a swine old man. And I feel like as a Christian, you could learn a life lesson from it. If you wanted to find some kind of value from it, right? If you want to find value from something, you can find value from it. It's like watching Grand Theft Auto and the story of Grand Theft Auto. Obviously, the main character of Grand Theft Auto is a really bad person. Like, he kills people. He hooks up with, like, degenerate people. He's screwing different women. They kill, they steal, they lie. I feel like as a Christian, obviously that stuff is bad, right? But you could learn from watching content, even if the person is bad, hypothetically, right? Like, even again, like this guy, what's his name? Christian Geek Central. I think it's called. I cannot pronounce his name. Pater. You could hypothetically find value from it, right? And like you watch him role play as a bad guy. As a Christian, you could find value from that if you want to, right? Again, I don't recommend evil, but maybe you could learn something. Who's to say, right? It's subjective. It's just the same thing with the Elder Scrolls Online. Again, even the idea of like the Dark Brotherhood or the Thieves Guild, obviously that stuff is evil. And you in real life, or even your character, you don't want to be a bad person. That stuff is evil and they'll damn you to hell. But I do think if you're willing to look at it from a more neutral scientific point of view, or even like a learning moral point of view, you could find value from that if you want to. And this guy proves it, right? I've seen other Christians talk about playing as like an evil character in a game, like Star Wars or some other game. You can play as an evil character. And I feel like you could learn something from watching someone who's a bad guy. Not by being bad, but you could learn something hypothetically. And I'm at least somewhat open-minded to this hypothetical possibility. I'd rather play as a good person and learn from being good, but you could learn from it. I think it's good to be open-minded enough to the possibility of advancing yourself or other people. But But it's subjective. I do think there's potential value. Or you can also condemn or show why it's bad. Like I used to make videos called Exposing the Darkness. And you can see why something is bad too. So even this game has a lot of evil in it. But you can, if you're willing to separate yourself from the content, you can see why it's evil. I think you could learn. Sometimes expand your mind or seek to glorify God in holiness. But evil is evil. And we should try to be good and not be evil. We should try not to touch this bad stuff. But if you touch this bad stuff, what's going to happen? Obviously bad consequences. So even seeing the darkness could teach you something. Or teach you why you shouldn't do it. Alright though, but yeah. Let's end on a light note. Again, there's a lot of fun, social interaction, lots of grinding, lots of dungeons, cool combat, tons and tons of places to explore, so much content and so much crap to do. And it's also a fantasy world. They have stuff that's morally gray and neutral. They have also bad stuff. They have good stuff. They have their false deities. They have their paganism. They have all sorts of stuff. You can be like a knight in shining armor, fight against monsters, and you can role play. They actually have some kind of moral system. They make moral choices in certain quests. Again, it's an awesome game, but you got to keep your wits about you too. All right, yeah, but there's a lot of fun. You can choose to be righteous if you want to be. All right, just remember, have fun and glorify God. Again, I'm not going to tell you what you can or can't do. Now, I might make a walkthrough on this eventually. I also just might not. I mean, I don't know. I have a million projects to work on, but thanks for watching. God is good.